Good morning and welcome to another Saturday talk sponsored by the United States Spiritist Federation. This morning we have the pleasure to have our friend LUIZ LIMA here with us. But before I bring him and introduce him, let's do our opening prayer. We elevate our thoughts. We try to disconnect from the outside world to focus our attention on our studies of this morning. We thank the spiritual benefactors for another opportunity. We ask them for their guidance, their protection, their inspiration. We ask them to help us, to assist us, so we can all together learn, understand, and more important, be able to put in practice on our daily lives all the teachings we're about to receive. We thank our Master Jesus for another opportunity of being reunited in His name, and with our hearts full of gratitude, we ask permission to start our studies. So be it. So we are very happy to have our friend LUIZ LIMA from Florida here with us today, talking about a very interesting subject, hallucination or mediumship. So LUIZ LIMA is a researcher on the scientific aspects of spiritism. He holds a degree in electronic engineering, and he works in the computer network industry. LUIZ, good morning, welcome.
Good morning, John. Good morning, everyone following us here on the internet on this Saturday morning. It's a pleasure to be back in here. And like you said, it's a fascinating topic. At least for me, it was. So that's why I'm bringing it in.
So okay. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. And the camera too, right? Okay. Let me start by telling you a story. I'm going to share some slides here with you so you can follow what we're going to be saying. This topic, hallucination, is right at the border or the boundary between science and spirituality. It's almost one of these half and half things. It's 50% one, 50% another. And one without the other will not get a reasonable explanation. We cannot get anywhere if we only work on 50% of this thing. The way we spiritists see from the spiritist side, when you look at what science calls hallucination, it means one thing. When they look from their end into the events of hallucination, it's another thing. So we're going to try to reconcile these two things, and hopefully we're going to bring some new information for you. And it's something that depends, in order to provide that explanation, go through it, we depend a little bit of some scientific explanation. So we're going to have to talk a little bit about science. But what got me interested in this thing, and that's the story I was going to tell you. A few years ago, many years ago, I was sitting with some people, okay, in a table, and we were just having coffee, some bread. And one of the people in there, suddenly, she said this: they are coming, they are arriving. So I myself, I kind of looked around. I didn't see anybody arrive. I didn't see anything. And I didn't really pay attention to that. So we kept going on our coffee. And a few minutes later, she looks at us and she says, look what they're doing on my arm. And we all look at it, and what are they doing at your arm? Can't you guys see? They are writing on my arm. And she showed the arm. So they are writing on my arm. And we go like, what are you talking about? It's making no sense to me. And she was really serious about it. And then she said, you see, it hurts when they write like this. And I go like, but what are they writing? And she goes like, can't you see the word? And I said, no, I can't. And no, none of us can. And she said, bad, B-A-D. And we kind of, okay. And that was many years ago. That's probably 15 years ago or something. And then, we went back to coffee and everything got back to normal. But those 3-4 minutes, it really got me. And I said, there's something here that I need to understand. I'm not quite sure what it is yet. And that's how I started getting interested in this thing. It took me many years to put the puzzle, all the parts together to come to a reasonable explanation, at least to myself. Okay, so that's the story. And I'm going to tell you what I got in terms of information that gave me a reasonable explanation. So let's go through this. Let me share some slides here with you, and you can follow along. So it's a question, right? Hallucination or mediumship? Are they the same thing? Is there a difference? Well, when we look into the a standard definition, this comes from Wikipedia. This is what they say. This is taken straight from the site. Hallucination is a perception in the absence of external stimulus that has qualities of real perceptions. It's a little bit confusing. The words are a little bit hard to understand, but the global concept here is it's something that subscribes. It's a definition that subscribes to the materialistic paradigm. Okay. Here's another one from one of the greatest dictionaries in this country here, Merriam-Webster. Again, the words are taken from the dictionary straight. A sensory perception that occurs in the absence of an actual external stimulus, same as above, right? And usually arises from neurological disturbance or in response to drugs. Again, we're still within the materialistic paradigm. It's still trying to give us a definition within a material plan. And how about us? Well, us, spiritists, our study for hallucination and whatever comes with that starts right at the core of spiritism, right at the codification. Allan Kardec, in the Spirits book, in the Medium's book, 1861, has a whole subchapter, okay, called the hallucination theory. And it's about 5 or 6 pages. And that's how it starts. Of course, today, 160 some years later, we have a lot more information from the Spiritist literature, and we're going to blend them all together here and see what we can get to. Like I said, we depend a little bit on science. So hallucination can have several different forms. Visual hallucination, hearing, all kinds of things. We chose a visual hallucination because I think it's just easier to explain, but it's exactly the same concept, exactly the same line of thought for all the other ones. So let's consider a case of visual hallucination. Okay, what is visual hallucination? It's somebody looks at, let's say somebody is with you, they look at the floor and they say, there's a dog on the floor and he's really mad, he wants to bite me. And you look at the floor and you don't see a thing. That would be a possible, not necessarily, but a possible case of hallucination. That's how we're going to get into when is it hallucination, when it is not, okay? All right, in order to understand why the person is saying that they are seeing something that's not there, we need to first, before we get this far, to understand how the eye works, how the visual system that we have in our heads works. So I'm going to leave this picture here so we can follow along. Let's put it on the side. And as you can figure out, this picture represents a schematic of a brain, okay, that was cut through like this. And the person is looking to the back of the screen. Okay, so you see the 2 eyes looking at something on the back of the screen, and you can see what is the parts that compose the visual system. Let's just call the visual system, okay? All right, so when somebody looks at something, when you look at something, you depend on having light so you can see it. If you go to the dark, if you turn off all the lights, you can't see a thing. Whatever objects are on the environment that you are, you can't see because there are no lights. So everything starts when lights get into our retina, okay? So the retina converts the light into a different form of energy. So the energy, the incoming energy is light. It goes through the retina. On the other side of the retina, as you can see here on the picture, there are these long wires. They're really wires. We can consider them wires. These long wires, okay, they plug into the back of the retina. So on the front of the retina, light comes in. On the back of the retina, what we have is electronic signal. So the retina converts light into electrical pulses. So from there on, everything is electronic. It's an electronic circuit, if you will. And the signal, the electrical signal is, it goes on the optical nerve into the middle of the brain. So the optical nerve is this wire that takes the electronic signal from the back of the retina and is going to connect this to what we call the thalamus. The thalamus is an important piece to understand because the only thing the thalamus does is concentrate all the nervous terminations that we have, all the nervous endings that we have in all our body. For example, if I step on your toe, right, you're gonna scream because you felt it. And why? How come did you feel it? Because in your toes you have millions of nervous connections, nervous sensors that come through the spine all the way up to the thalamus. So the thalamus concentrates all of these nervous terminations. Everything goes in there. Okay, so the signal that comes from the back of the retina through the optical nerve gets delivered, per se, to this thalamus. This thalamus doesn't do anything else than distribute the signal. So it has to take this information and send to the area of the brain that is capable to interpret signal coming from the retina to make us aware that what we are looking at is a chair, a table, a dog, a mad dog. Okay, so it has, this information has to be delivered to the proper area of the brain. Same happens to anything that gets into the thalamus. So the thalamus makes this logistics of receiving signal and sending out to whatever part of the brain the signal needs to be sent to. And there's never a mistake in there, because if the signal comes to the retina, the thalamus knows it's something that has to go to the area that interprets images. Okay. How is this signal taken from the thalamus to the area of destination in the brain? We don't have wires for this. The same way we have an optical nerve, which is a hardwired connection, if you will, from the eye into the thalamus. From the thalamus to its destination, there is no wire. There is no such a thing. What happens is it's going to go through a network of neurons. Now, neurons, as you know, they are small, tiny, tiny, tiny cells. So how come, you know, if you think of the size of the brain, how come signal can travel, even if it's 1 inch from the thalamus to its destination? 1 inch is 1 million neurons that have to be there side by side to make it happen. And that's exactly what takes place. The information takes place because one neuron attaches to the back of the other, then the other, then the other, then the other. That's how it works. This wire, if you will, okay, is not there. It is only there to carry that signal. When the signal travels through and gets delivered, the whole a virtual wire formed by all these neurons gets dismantled. And these neurons are available to make other connections with other neurons and carry over the next electrical signal. This is how it works. It's really complicated and it's very interesting. But anyway, what matters to us here, the first point that matters to us here is we need to look at the connection between these two neurons. They are kind of piggyback, right? One plugs into the back of the other one. These connection points are called synapses. So let's put like a magnifier here and see what we have. What you have here is on the left side, you have the end of one neuron, and on the right side, the beginning of the next. And as you can see in the picture, there's no physical connection between them. They don't touch, and they don't. There is no physical touch between neurons. They get very close to each other, but they do not touch. There is no physical connection between them. So how is the electrical pulse transferred from the neuron on the left side here of the picture to the one on the right side, right? The signal has to travel. What happens here so this travels? It's a complicated but interesting thing. When the signal travels from the left neuron and it gets to the end of the neuron, what you see there are little that I represented. They represent little bags with stuff in there. For now, let's call stuff, right? And the electrical signal hits these things. These little bags are called synapse vesicles. When the electrical signal hits those things, it breaks the vesicle. And what's inside are neurotransmitters. They are neurotransmitters. They are chemical substances. So if you open up the bag, or when the bag opens up, what happens to these substances? They leak. So there's a leakage, literally. They leak and they will, not touch because they're liquid, but they're going to make its way to the other side where the other neuron is. And the other neuron is going to sense that there's chemical elements in there through their receptors. And it will reassemble the electrical signal. Yeah, it sounds complicated. It is. So again, electrical signal, then neurotransmitters, electrical signal, neurotransmitters, electrical signal. That's how it works. Why is this important to us? Because if I ask you, for example, if I show you this object here, hopefully you can see, and I ask you, what is this? I believe 100% of the people are going to say, well, it's a pen. So that's a very objective question with a very objective response and answer. So it's a pen, and that's it, done. Now, if I show you this again, and I ask you, well, do you think this pen is beautiful? Well, do you like this pen? That's a whole different story, because now you're going to start having responses from different people, all types of responses. Some people are going to say, it's really white. I don't like white stuff. Some other people say, this is too small. Some other people are going to say, this is too big. We're going to have a million different opinions, better word, perceptions of what this pen looks like or what it means to me. So any question or anything in the brain that is objective has to do with the electrical part. Anything that is perception has to do with the chemicals, the neurotransmitters. So if a person has the level of neurotransmitters, the chemical substances in the brain, out of balance, the perception will change. The person can have a perception that's not really what the most of other people around will perceive. So that is one case that can generate or produce perceptions that are, I would say, out of whack for the people around. So everybody, for example, somebody can tell me, there's a mad dog here on the floor, he wants to bite me. And everybody looks and says, no, there's no such a thing. So imbalance in the neurotransmitters can create a different perception, different from reality. But that's not spiritism, that's science, but it's a possibility, okay? All right, let's keep going here. We're just bringing up information so we can take a conclusion. So this information goes through the neurons and all those synapses, and they will get to the final destination. The final destination is called cortex. Let me try to have you visualize a cortex. Imagine the brain as a mass of cells. It's a volume, right? It's a mass of cells. And this is in layers. The brain, it's in layers. So you got several different layers of cells, okay? The 6 top layers, the 6 outer layers is what we call the cortex. That is where interpretation of these electrical pulses takes place. The cortex, usually when we talk about the cortex for illustration purposes, we have something like you see in the image here. It has different colors depending on the area that you're looking at. Okay, so for example, this red area on the right side of the screen represents the back of the brain. So this person is sideways, right? And what we discovered through the years is that each one of these areas is responsible for interpreting one different kind of signal. So for example, on the back of the brain, where you have the red part, these parts are called lobes. So on the back of the brain, we have the occipital lobe, which is responsible for recognizing images and anything that comes with that, color dimensions, etc. For example, on the side here in purple, what you see is the temporal lobe, which is responsible for recognitions of sounds and tones and music and all of that. There's no way that a pulse, an electrical pulse that comes from the retina is going to make its way to the temporal lobe, because the brain the thalamus knows that the temporal lobe will get stuff that comes from the ears. So there's no mix here. So all this signal travels through all these complicated process, makes its way into the cortex. Now, and the cortex is going to interpret this thing. It's going to look at the electrical pulses and is going to tell me at the conscious level, what you're looking at is this particular object. Okay. Well, interesting thing is this. If we look at the first two parts in this diagram, this is just the acquisition of the information, right? The retina looks at, and the optical nerve transforms the energy in electrical pulses. I call this the acquisition process. Then through the thalamus, we go to a control process where the thalamus gets the information from here and sends over there. So it's a logistics control. And at the end, in the cortex, we have interpretation. Okay, so enough science. Now let's become spiritists again. Think about a medium. Okay, so a medium looks at the chair, for example, and you will say, well, there's a spirit sitting here. Let's just say Dr. Bezerra de Menezes is sitting over here. Everybody else looks at the chair and say, no, he is not. And the medium will say, no, but he is, because I can see it. And one interesting thing, when that happens, we go back to analyze mediumship now in the very basic level. For the medium to tell us there's a spirit sitting at the chair, think about this with me. Does he or she have to be her eyes open? No. Actually, the other way around, when the medium is going through a process like this, they prefer to have their eyes closed. Usually they do something like this. So the actual visual, from the material plan, the actual visual scene or scenery will not impact what he's seeing without the physical eyes. So they prefer to close their eyes. Usually they even do like this. So it is not necessary for the medium to tell me that there's a spirit sitting at the chair. It's not necessarily to use the eyes. So there is no acquisition because there is no retina in the process. There is no optical nerve involved in the process. So there is no thalamus controlling anything that never got there. So that information comes directly into the cortex of the medium, but it doesn't come through the eyes. So here we have two channels of reaching the same destination. When the medium tells us there's a spirit sitting at the chair, and I open my eyes, and I try to look at it, my criteria is different than his. These are two different criteria. So we're going to argue forever and ever if we do not understand this. Because I'm always going to say there is nothing because I got my eyes open and there is nobody sitting on the chair. There is no mad dog trying to bite you. On the other hand, the medium gets that information pre-interpreted directly into his cortex. How come the information gets to the cortex without passing through the eyes and everything else? It's an alternative, let's put it this way for now, channel called pineal gland. So the pineal gland is the way that one way that allows us to perceive and capture information from the spirit world, and that information comes pre-interpreted straight into the cortex. That is mediumship. So when a medium and an incarnate person argue or talk about there is such a thing or there isn't, we're not going to get anywhere because we're using different criteria. Okay, so let's go next level up. We're trying to make the point, right? In modern science, we have something called cerebro or PET scans, CAT scans, different types of scanners. What these things do is they look at the live brain metabolism, in which it's going to display to, it's a machine that has a monitor, okay, and a display. On that display, what the technicians and the doctors are going to see are which areas, and this is real time, so it's very dynamic, which areas of the brain are having activity on. So for example, if I look at something, right, I'm looking at something, if I'm in the machine, it is expected that the machine shows activity right here in the back of my brain on the occipital lobe, because that's the lobe responsible for interpreting and taking care of imagery. Okay, so two things here. Technology gets better every year. So the scanners that we have today are much better than the ones 10 years ago, 20 years ago, of course. And they will be much better in 10 years. That's one thing. Number two is for the medium to get into this machine and the machine to be able to capture something, we need to know what areas of the brain does something. We need to have that knowledge, and we do. Science dominates this completely. So we know that in the back of the brain, activity back here, if the machine shows up, something in the retina is working. I'm looking at something. If it goes under the temporal lobe, something in the ears is coming. I'm listening to music, whatever it is. So we have to have that previous knowledge to use the machine and interpret signals correctly. Like I said, we do. We dominate almost 100% of this. The almost is the problem, as you're going to see. All right, so let's keep going. Let's go back to our example. So we went through all of this thing. So we look at something, goes through the retina, the whole thing that we spoke about, and it makes its way into the cortex. So it all started in the eye. The eye is looking at something, and it passes through all these processes, and it makes its way into the cortex. When it gets into the cortex, think about this with me. The cortex is a mass of cells, just like the whole brain is. We're talking about cells, physical, material elements. How can material elements called cells interpret electrical signals or pulses and tell me what you're looking at is a mad dog, what you're looking at is a cell phone, what you're looking at is a chair? How can cells do this? They can't, because this requires intelligence. It requires something else called intelligent principle. So when this makes into the brain, it has to be passed on to another level where the intelligent principle is. And then the information is going to come back at the material level and is going to report, you know, this is a chair. For example, if I show you, let's say, a fruit that you never saw before, and I ask you, what is this? Well, the best you're going to say, the best you're going to tell me is, well, I think it's a fruit. But you don't know the name, you don't know anything about that fruit. And you might even say, I never saw this before. And that's true, because you never saw it before. But then I tell you the name of the fruit is whatever. Let's say an apple. It's an apple. So from that moment on, this now becomes part of your database of things that you know, that your eyes have seen. So next time I show you an apple, the whole thing is gonna take place. The retina, optical nerve, and so and so and so. It goes to the intelligent principle, and the intelligent principle is gonna come back and say, well, this is an apple. And by the way, you know this because you've seen it already. That's how it works. So the interpretation cannot take place at the physical level, because they are just cells, material substances. When it hits the cortex, it's gonna, now we're gonna detail a little bit more to get into hallucination, is it or not, okay? So when it gets to the cortex has four, this is gonna travel through 4 areas. So it's, we could understand as 4 layers: primary visual cortex, secondary associative, and the interpretation cortex. For today's study, we do not need the last 2, so we are going to concentrate only on the primary and the secondary cortex. We don't need the other ones, not today, for this particular study. So let's say that we are going to use a scanner, a cerebral scanner, PET scan, CAT scan. We're going to put somebody in, and we're going to tell this person, look at this particular thing. So the machine, okay, is going to tell us, because there's going to be activity on the back of the brain. We look at the machine and we say, oh, there is some activity coming from the retina. So this guy is looking at something. He's watching something. So the machine is very precise on that. It's a great, great, great tool. By the way, a machine like this is what, it's one of these before and afters in medicine. Incredible how much we can do today with these machines. It gets to this level of detail. So we put somebody in a machine, ask him to look at something. Their brain is being scanned, and it's going to reveal, well, this guy is looking at something. So because it came from the retina, it goes to the most primitive area in the cortex. It's called primary visual cortex. Anything that comes from the retina will make its way into the primary visual cortex. Now I ask you, let's say I go to you and say, hey, what did you have for dinner last night? And you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me, I had this and that. Question, do you need to have your eyes open for that? Or can you close your eyes and just tell me, oh, I had this nice dinner yesterday, this, and this? We don't need the eyes. So memory is something that does not require and will not show on the machine any activity in the retina, because it's not necessary. And it is so that if I ask you something that's on a far remote past, let's say, for example, where did you get your vacation? Where did you go on vacation in, I don't know, 2005? You might need time, because it's not something that is right there. So in order to make the process easier to go back in time and bring the information, we close our eyes. It's very common. So we go like, in 2005, and you close our eyes. Oh, I was in such a place. So there is no need for retina or the eyes to be open. So anything coming from the memory does not go to the visual primary visual cortex. It goes into the secondary. Another thing, next step, imagination. If I tell you, can you imagine yourself wearing pajamas right now, riding a horse in the desert? Can you imagine that? Of course you can. Do you need your eyes open? No, you don't. It wouldn't even make sense, right? So anything, imagination means secondary visual cortex, because there is no need for the eyes, for the retina to be, the eyes to be open and the retina capture visual light. There is no need for that. Number 3, hallucination. So let's come back. Hallucination, we're going to take one example. So we use the same example from now to the end, and makes more consistent on the study. So hallucinating, we're going to use the example that I gave you before. Somebody looks at the floor, tells me there's a mad dog on the floor. He wants to bite me. Everybody else around looks at the same spot and say, no. There is no such a thing. And you see, because of lack of comprehension and lack of understanding on the process, hallucination became a word that's used sometimes in an offensive way. So sometimes, somebody tells us something and we just go, oh, this guy's hallucinating. I mean, hallucinating is not this. There's a clinical reason for that. It's a medical term. Okay, so let's go back here. So somebody looks at the floor and tells us, there's a mad dog on the floor. He wants to bite me. We all look at the same spot. There's nothing there. So a group of students about 20 years ago decided to study hallucination using the scanners. So they said, what happens if we put the guy who is hallucinating in the scanner when he is hallucinating? Well, let's give it a shot, see what happens. So what they did is they put a guy in, several people, they did with several people. They were supposedly hallucinating, and the cerebral scanner, it was expected that this goes to the secondary visual cortex, because there is no dog on the floor. He's not mad and he's not going to bite anybody. So it was expected that this thing would go to the secondary visual cortex. However, the machine says there's activity in the retina. Whoa. Whoa. There's activity in the retina. Activity in the retina means the eyes has to be open. And then when people are hallucinating, and then I remember my example that I gave in the very beginning, the person with the arm written the word bad. When I was studying this many years later, I said, on that day, she had her eyes open. She was not like this. It was not straight mediumship in the classic sense. She had her eyes open. The person who hallucinates and tells you there's a dog on the floor, he wants to bite me, they have their eyes open. So we have to kind of make a correction here, because if the eyes need to be open, if they close their eyes, the dog is gone. If they open the eyes, the dog is back in. This is primary visual cortex, not secondary. And that blew completely the expectations of those studying the subject. So they abandoned the subject. For many years, they didn't know if the machine was showing wrong signals, if they were doing the wrong procedure to test all of that. So they abandoned the research. Many years later, and that was about maybe 2015 or so, here in New York City, Columbus University, a group of students took from the spot they stopped. They had gone through until that point. I said, no, we got better technology now. We got better machine. We need to see what's going on. The machine today is capable of showing more details, more specific areas of activity. Instead of a broad area on the brain, they can pinpoint exactly where it is, right? Depending on technology. They decided to take the thing back into their hands and went to the lab to test. So same thing. They called several people hallucinating, and the machine starts to display other things. The machine shows that there is activity in the thalamus and hypothalamus areas. And they put their hands in your heads and go, how come there is no, it's not a sensorial area, that there's no, how can this be? In the middle of the brain, thalamus and hypothalamus, the cerebral scanner is telling us there's activity in there. That's not possible from their point of view, from their understanding. Now us, spiritists, let's get into the picture right now. What else is in there? Thalamus, they're all together. They are all close by, nearby. Thalamus, hypothalamus, and pineal gland. Oh, that's becoming more interesting now. Pineal gland, we spoke about this. Isn't that the channel for mediumship? Isn't that how mediums detect what's going on out there in the spirit world? So what the machine was detecting was mediumship activity. They just didn't know, so they couldn't interpret what was happening. It didn't make sense to them because it's kind of out of their league, at least for now. So the people hallucinating, are they really hallucinating in the classical sense that they have their brain is, not working right? Is that what it is? Maybe not. Maybe it's just a form of mediumship, not all forms of mediumship, one form of mediumship. And not only that, for those who hallucinate, using the classical term, they have to be mediums. They just don't know. They barely know what a medium is. And most of these people don't even know what the spirit world is. So these people end up in mental institutions, in hospitals. They are forced to take several different types of drugs and, you know, all of that, when all they have is uneducated mediumship. Even for those educated, it still can happen. So let's move on to something that Allan Kardec tells us in one of these texts he left before he died. This is a free translation here, okay? He's talking about spiritual influence. It's a long chapter, but this is what matters to us in regards to the subject. Through the assimilation of pure spiritual fluids, the spirit is the communicating spirit discarnate. The spirit identifies itself, so to speak, with the person it wants to influence. So there are two things here, right? There's a spirit out there that's trying to influence a person, okay? So not only this spirit transmits the thought, look at this now, but can exert a physical action on the person. It can make the person act or speak at its will, can make the person say what the spirit wants, to serve, in a word, use the person's organs if they were its own. That includes the eyes. So the spirit out there can influence to a certain point that he uses the eyes of the person to be influenced, which in this case, it has to be a medium to have that perception and act the way it is. It can use the person's organs. It can finally neutralize the actions of the person's own spirit and paralyze the person's free will. Okay, so we're going to combine two things here that come from this one phrase. I'm going to show you a book here, okay? This medium's book, everybody knows, okay? And I want you to look at me in the camera here. So here I am. And I can look at the left, I can look at the right, and I can see different things, all right? Now, what happens if somebody comes with this book here and puts on my face just like this, okay? Just like that, to the point that if I turn left or if I turn right, all that I see is the book. So now I turn to my right and I'm going to say, oh, I see the spirit, I see the medium's book. And I turn to my left and I say, oh, I see the medium's book. So that's what I'm seeing. What's in front of my eyes. That's what paralyzed the free will and use the person's organs mean. So there's a point of influence so intense that it could generate that kind of thing. And then Allan Kardec closes his explanation in the medium's book. Again, people, 160 some years, right? He didn't have a whole lot. He didn't have PET scans, nothing like this, right? And he closes by saying this. So, if all the theories about hallucination are, which theories? The ones that come from science at the time. So, if all the theories about hallucination are insufficient for explaining all the facts, and they were in that time and they still are, it is because there is something more involved than hallucinations per se. And we just saw it. There is more. Yes, there is more. Okay? Now, luckily, several years later, after the codification, André LUIZ, our great friend, Spirit André LUIZ, right? Great, our friend, not mine, everybody's, because what they brought is incredible. He will address this in details using modern vocabulary with more knowledge than ever before. And he has a chapter called Idioplasty in the book, The Mechanics of Mediumship. Idioplasty. And I extracted 3 paragraphs so we can compare with everything else that we spoke so far. We spoke for 40 minutes, right? So we're going to look at 3 paragraphs and blend with 40 minutes of talk. So he is talking about influences, same thing, spirits influencing people. The names that they use, so you can follow the explanation, because I'm extracting, so I need to put in context. The the discarnate spirit, he calls hypnotist. The person, the incarnated person, he calls the subject. So let's go through the text. The subject, the person incarnated, will contemplate the image in the minutest detail. What image? The image that's going to be, like I did for me here before. If I put the spirit's book, the medium's book here, the image is the image, this medium's book. So there's going to be an image placed in front of the person's eyes. And that person will catch that in the minutest detail. I'm going to continue the text, but just a break here. So, for example, when the person who is hallucinating, which is not really a person anymore, we can call medium. It might be unknown, it might be known or not to the person, but still it's a medium. So when the medium tells me there's a mad dog here and he wants to bite me, if you ask him questions about the dog, he will give you the smallest, minutest details about the fur, the eyes, the teeth, the breed. He will tell you everything, the minutest detail. Okay, so if the hypnotist places a mirror in front of the subject before telling him that, the person will see 2 of them. Why 2? What does a mirror do? The mirror reflects an image. So for the person, it is so real, so real, so real that if they put a mirror in front, the medium sees both of them. Incredible, huh? Let's keep going with this, with the text. The word most often used for this phenomenon is hallucination. However, this definition is not really accurate, since there is neither daydreaming nor illusion involved. Because for science, for those studying the subject, they attach this to daydreaming, to illusion, to, something is wrong in the physical parts of the brain. So Andrea LUIZ is trying to tell us, if we spiritists use the word hallucination for something like this, it's not a good definition for us. We'd better use ideoplasty. It's more accurate. It means a lot. It brings a whole different world of explanations for us. So we should use, on a situation like this, ideoplasty, not hallucination. And here's how he closes the subject. And we really need to pay attention to this. In intellectual effects mediumship, 2 types of mediumship: physical effects, which is something, appearances and stuff like that; intellectual effects. In intellectual effects mediumship, ideoplasty plays an extremely important role. A certain class of constantly repeated thoughts, emitted towards the mind of an inexperienced medium, right, may force it to accept certain images held by the persistent mental wave as actual situations and personalities. So this discarnate spirit gets the medium and start, forcing this image in all the time, repeating thoughts all the time, forcing mental wave upon the person, the medium, to a point that the medium is going to say, this is real. This is no mediumship. And he even closes the phrase, like a child who believes he or she is actually looking at this or that landscape or person, although it's only a movie. This is a this is the wrap up of an explanation that for us spiritists closes a lot of open holes. It sets the explanation straight, black and white. So when somebody tells us there's a mad dog here and he wants to bite me, we know what this means. We should understand, first of all, respect above all in any case, by the way, but respect the person, and we need to understand what the person is going through. Don't say, no, there's no dog in there, because it's a challenge. It makes it worse for those, right? What happens is, with time, the medium gets educated, if he ever decides to, learn more and so and so and so, to a point where when they are suspicious of something, they will ask. Chico Xavier used to do this. Divaldo Franco used to do this many years ago. They would have to ask, there's a guy here with a black tie. Is there really a guy there? He would ask for those, close friends and so, because they couldn't tell at times. So the mediums are subject to that kind of thing. Look at this phrase here. Thoughts emitted towards the mind of an inexperienced medium may force it to accept certain images held by the persistent mental wave as actual situations and personalities, and there is nothing actual in there. There is no reality there. It's just for them. There is no mad dog willing to bite anybody. There is no such a thing. So with this, let's try to wrap up. There are consequences to the person going through this all the time, of course. So let's talk a little bit about this. First of all, hallucinogens. Those are substances that make the person have a perception of reality that's not really there. But that's not mediumship. Those are substances that create alterations in the neurosystems, in the neurotransmitters, and change the person's perception. Even something simple as alcohol can change your perception. You get 2 drinks of something, 3 drinks of something, it will alter the perception. That's not mediumship. That's different. Okay? For these cases here, there is an external triggering factor, an external stimulus. What we spoke about here today is not this. It's something different. Number 2, for the medium going through this and seeing dogs and people and all these things that do not exist, there are several consequences. Number 1, let's just say that I tell you there's a mad dog here, he wants to bite me. And then everybody around me tells me, no. And okay, a few minutes later, the dog is gone and I go on with my life. We go on. 2 years from now, I'm going to be able to tell somebody else, oh, by the way, there was a day that this thing happened. They will not tell the fact as memory. They will tell as a fact. For example, I can tell you something today, and I would say something like this. Oh, yesterday, I just remembered this. When I tell you yesterday, it's something in the past, obviously, I remembered something. So I'm in full consciousness that there was not a fact. It was something that I brought from memory. It just happened a day ago, but it was brought in from memory, secondary visual cortex. For the person who went through idioplasty, they will report that as a fact. It did happen. I was there. I saw it. My eyes were open. Another consequence is, because it's a fact for them, right? Let's say a fact being, for them, it's reality. Next time, so I remember, right? I told you there's a mad dog here who wants to bite me. So next time I need to go through that road, for example, or through that path, I'm not going to go, because I will be afraid of the dog being there again. So I will just, drive around or work around some house because I don't want to see that dog again. It was very traumatic. I was afraid of that dog. You understand the consequences? Because for them, it was reality. It was their eyes captured from their point of view. So the brain will record that as a fact, and it will be in their memory forever, because for them, they saw it. So they will talk about it, they will report that, but not something like, oh, on that day I remembered a dog. No. There was a dog. And the worst of all, unfortunately, is if the medium doesn't work, towards understanding more mediumship, study more, going to spiritist centers, and so their quality of life can drop significantly. Can you imagine? For example, the example I just gave you. Okay, I have to go from this location to that location, but I have to take the longest road because the shortest I can go, there's a mad dog that wants to bite me. He's there. So the medium's quality of life can be affected greatly, tremendously, with situations like this. So in the end, hallucination or mediumship? Well, hopefully you can get this answer by yourself. Hopefully I was able to give you enough elements for you to understand. And again, on this book, The Mechanics of Mediumship, chapter, I think, 19, Idioplasty, read that. I really encourage you to go there and read it. So thank you very much. And we'll be here for questions and answers. Thank you all.
Thank you, Luis. Wow, that's fascinating, very interesting. All the scientific aspect, very, very, very good to learn all about that. Yeah. And we could keep talking here for hours and hours.
A few days, yeah.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating subject. Thank you. But I think we have some questions from the audience. So let's start with the one from Paula Craig. Hi, Paula. Thanks. I'm not sure what disease that is. My question is, am I hallucinating or am I actually communicating with a spirit? The spirit was my husband in life. Have been with him for 8 years. My spirit says we communicate through consciousness.
It's a little vague, I think, the question. But let me tell you this. Idioplasty, it's something, first of all, it's something in the past. It already happened, okay? And it's just that the medium thinks it's real. Hallucinating, you're asking if you're hallucinating. It's hard for us to tell, but if you are hallucinating, if you're having episodes of idioplasty, you have to ask around. For example, I think my husband is here, you're saying, right? Was he here? Is he not? Because if it's not something that seems absolutely real, another thing you can do, when you close your eyes, is he still there? When you open your eyes, is he still there? Those are all elements that you can start using to build a pattern, because each person is different anyway. Each case is different, but you have to build a pattern. The first pattern is my eyes. Do they need to be open, yes or no? When I open my eyes, he goes away. If he does, that's not hallucination. It could be plain simple case of mediumship, but not idioplasty. Idioplasty is a very, very, very specific case of mediumship, but not all mediumship is idioplasty. Okay, so I think the two elements that will give the medium like the base to start forming a pattern are: first, do I need my eyes open, yes or no? Second, let me ask around. I saw this. There's somebody here with me. Are you seeing this too? Yes or no? Okay.
Yeah. She's saying that he's with me all the time, like he's in the room with me.
Yeah, that would be, I would say that would be more like mediumship. That sounds like, a perception, mediumistic perception.
Yeah. And she complements, a spirit can also punish you for something you did to them. I experienced this. Yeah.
Well, that's obsessive processes. We study that a lot. The obsessors are masters in using ideoplasty.
Yeah.
They are masters. They know how to do that to a point where, they will take you to the 30th floor of a building and get you down. No, just jump. So.
And I think it's important to mention, Paula, the intention and what we receive from the spirits that are close to us, that we are seeing. We have to analyze that, right? Because inferior spirits will try to command us, to influence us, to force us to do things. And spirits that are there to help will inspire us, will guide us, but will not force us to do anything.
Right.
So, we need to try to separate the good influences from the bad influences, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next, from Danielle Santos. Hi, Danielle. Thank you for the nice neurophysiology explanation. Since sensorial perception is the key to determine the input source, when the source comes from a spirit, the information will be codified using pretty much the same brain machinery used to identify concrete things, right? So how to explain cases where there is no external spiritual influence, but just animism?
Yeah, those cases, hallucination, okay, is not animism because there is influence from discarnate spirits. Animism is just a person himself or herself bringing content from a past life or from its spiritual history. So I wouldn't link those, okay, hallucination or ideoplasty and animism. But like you said, Daniel, the content, with the brain machinery, the brain is still the same. But the way to place the information in the brain is different. Okay. In the example that we saw, for example, looking at something, one path is coming through the eyes, the other path is coming through the pineal gland, and there are different criteria, although the brain is the same. So there are different things in regards the path. The brain interprets the same way, but the path makes a difference.
Thanks, Luis. So here, from Luis Leon, the codification tells us that the perispirit is tied to the physical body molecule by molecule. In your view, is the perispirit also a mass of cells? Does our perispirit, while we are incarnated, has a brain?
Okay, this is a kind of a gray area because of the vocabulary. Cells, when we speak about cells, we are speaking about physical things, okay? The equivalence of cells in the spirit world, André Luiz calls mental cells. That's what they call, which is the part of the cell that is connected to the spirit world. So the perispirit has a brain. It's not a brain in the sense that we have a physical thing. The intelligent principle, which is the spirit, is intelligent principle. It uses its resources to, which is the mind, that's what we call the mind, uses its resources to communicate with the brain, but not necessarily it has a brain in the sense that we can understand a side-by-side thing. Here's the perispirit brain, this is the physical brain. It's not like that. The vocabulary is a little bit difficult because and André Luiz tells us that, we don't have the right vocabulary for them to explain everything. So they use the closest words that they can for that. But the intelligent principle can have a perispirit in whatever form it wants. Okay, it will create the perispirit in whatever form they want. So that's why it's so difficult. Is the brain exactly the same? Because on the next life, you could be a different brain. It could be a different form, a different aspect, physical aspect. So But that doesn't have anything to do with hallucination, though, right? That's just talking about influences of the intelligent principle and the perispirit.
Yeah, thanks. So how can, from the United States Spiritist Federation, how can Spiritism help those that suffer from the so-called psychiatric diseases to control their symptoms?
Psychiatric diseases is a broad thing because we don't know everything. The science doesn't know everything yet. So there's a global name, psychiatric diseases. And then with time, we are going to be able to pinpoint, oh, it's this thing, or it's that thing, or it's this thing, is this thing. Now, to control the symptoms are something that come from the intelligent principle, from the spirit. It comes from the intelligent principle having the physical experience. So to control, we have to go back to the spirit. The spirit is let's say, in balance when morally and intellectually it is in balance. So if something is going wrong, provided that there's no damage in the brain, okay, provided that there's no damage in the brain, because that's a whole different story. So the fact that the spirit has to be in balance, to be in good shape, to be healthy, right? It has to be in balance in terms of moral and in terms of intelligence. If the spirit is not in balance in these two things, we are going to have all kinds of diseases. Psychiatric diseases is one form of an imbalance. Other people have other types. We all have different diseases, all of us, right? So some people have degenerative diseases like diabetes and cancers. Some others have schizophrenia. Some others have psychiatric diseases. It is still something that reports back to only two things: moral and intelligence, because that's what the intelligent principle holds in it.
Thanks, Luiz. Is out there any books beside the Medium's book by Allan Kardec? Actually, to explain mediumship. That's what he wanted. Freddie Ricardo wants to know.
Well, there's several different books in Spiritist literature. I showed you two here, the Medium's book and also this one, The Mechanics of Mediumship. It's another one. There's the Domains of Mediumship, in the Domains of Mediumship. So I would say there's at least there's more than 100 books about it. And as we go along and we learn more in general, especially from scientific stuff like we spoke today, information becomes updated and more books will come out, more information comes out. But yes, if you go back to the classic Spiritist literature, there's at least these three books: Medium's book by Allan Kardec, The Mechanics of Mediumship by André Luiz, Spirit, and In the Domains of Mediumship by André Luiz, and also Evolution in Two Worlds by André Luiz. Those are classic books that will explain a lot of mediumship.
Okay, so from Yasko, how better we are today in this to distinguish between hallucinations detected medically and uneducated mediumship? Is the medical field better equipped, or is the knowledge of spiritual influencing more accepted?
Okay, so first of all, how does hallucination can be detected medically? It's still, I would say, we're in the very first stages, because there is stuff that's not hallucination, and they are seen as hallucination. So now you're telling the difference between detected medically and uneducated mediumship. There is no uneducated mediumship in science. There is no such a thing. There is no mediumship in science. So they will never be able to say, oh, now at this point, this particular case, I'm in doubt. I don't know if this is hallucination, medically speaking, or if it's uneducated mediumship. There is no such a thing in science, okay? For us, we can tell, for the most part, we can tell because we know both. We know what hallucination from the clinical medical point of view is, and uneducated mediumship is. So as far as we can, going back again, can build a pattern, okay, again, with the eyes and asking around, then we will know if it's one or the other. And there was another last thing. Can you put the question back, please, so I can address the last part that was interesting too? Let's see here. There was a third item that she said. Okay. Is the knowledge of spiritual influence more accepted? Not by science. Not by science. Not to this level. Science accepts certain things. For example, that the mind has an impact, for example, recovering from diseases and stuff like that. But that's the mind of the person and only the person. It doesn't mean that somebody else out there, some other discarnate spirit, influences this patient and he is getting better. No, it's all within the person's domain. But so they are, going to the next level, which is the mind level. But we are far. And also you ask, is the medical field better equipped? We just saw on the explanation that it is. It's detecting activity in the pineal gland, but they don't know how to interpret that. So it's not only better equipped, it's medical knowledge. What does it mean? Why are we seeing activity in the pineal gland? So the equipment is better. We are better equipped, but we don't have the right pattern for interpretation yet. Unfortunately, we'll get there. It's a matter of time.
Thanks. Okay, so this is the last one, Luiz. Okay. How can one educate their mediumship if there is no spiritist center close to where they live?
Okay, today everything changed because of the pandemic and everything. So it's going to be about 1.5 years with this thing. Several spiritist centers, just like several churches, for example, or several religious institutions, they had to close. They started doing online stuff. Online is becoming so rich, especially in spiritism, is becoming so rich in information, in talks, in producing lectures, producing new materials, that is becoming a lot easier today than it was before. So today, for example, if you're listening to us right now, right, this is done on the East Coast of the United States, but the guys in Japan, they can be looking at it right now, or this is going to be recorded. They'll be looking into 2 days from now, 3 days from now. And you yourself, for example, if you want to revise some information, this is going to be recorded. So you can go back to this. So yes, the resources are in place. And educating mediumship there's another element, which is the practice. But the practice won't come before we get to a certain level of comprehension or a certain level of understanding. And to get to that level of understanding, yes, we can do that all online. And there are certain centers that will do, at least on a test basis, I would say, that will continue their mediumship meetings online. You have to have really experienced mediums to do that. You have to have, a right commitment, the right connections and everything. But there are centers doing this. But again, with the pandemic, things are going to change, and we have several lectures, several different elements that can be used all online, at least for now.
Thanks, Luiz. Yeah, as you mentioned, only on these talks by the United States Spiritist Federation, we have close to 100 now, all recorded and posted on the YouTube of the United States Spiritist Federation from all different subjects. So yeah, you are absolutely right. There's plenty of material out there that we can research and look for those that are interested. I know that Ricardo just posted that we should do more events like this one. It will be helpful to those that still don't believe. Yeah, yes, it is, but those that don't believe don't look for it, right? So that makes it more difficult, right? but out there, what we can do is to make those events put out there and allow the internet to disseminate it for us, right? So this talk is recorded and it is posted on our website. Okay, Luis, thank you very much. Very interesting subject. As I mentioned before, we could be here talking for hours and days, but it's good. We leave something out there for next time, and
That's
maybe
right.
when you come back, you continue on the subject.
Okay, we'll be here.
So before I invite you to do our final prayer, just let me announce for next Saturday at 11 a.m. We continue in Florida. We'll have a talk with Sabrina Tomaszewski, who is an active member of the Peace and Knowledge Spiritist Center in Orlando. And she's going to talk to us about facing struggles. So Saturday, August 14th at 11 a.m. Okay? Thank you, Luis. Can you do our final prayer for us? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to invite everyone listening to us right now to just relax, close your eyes, concentrate on the image of our Master Jesus, his serene face, his eyes. He was able to show us so much when he was incarnated. We appreciate that. Thank you, Jesus, for all the opportunities that we are given, for all the knowledge that we were provided with, for all the information that was compiled years later in the form of a consoler. We want to also to thank each one of us here, our spirit guides, the mentors of all the work done by the Spiritist Federation, all the work done by Spiritist centers across and around the world. We should follow our path, having in mind that we are all going to be perfect one day, and there's a destination. That destination is where Jesus is now. So we need to dive into what he said. We need to abide to what he suggested. And we need to be true to ourselves, that whatever information we acquire when studying his messages, we're going to be using for ourselves first and for the others that are also in need. The good that we do to others will be a good to ourselves. So thank you, Jesus, for this one opportunity again to be here with everybody following us, and that everybody can have a great weekend and be in peace. Thank you.